Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. The US and the Taliban are reportedly closer to sealing a peace deal for the withdrawal of the American troops from Afghanistan. Two Taliban and a US official say the deal could be signed within this month. The development comes a day after Afghan President Ashraf Ghani reported notable progress in the Doha peace talks. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg has also welcomed apparent progress towards a deal in Afghanistan, but warned the Taliban must reduce attacks. The prospective deal would see the US pull troops from Afghanistan, in return for which the Taliban would provide security guarantees. The US and the Taliban have been on the brink of a breakthrough in September before US President Donald Trump abruptly called off the talks. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is arriving in Islamabad on a two-day bilateral visit to Pakistan on 13th of February. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says the Turkish president's visit will help promote multifaceted bilateral relations between the two countries. Let's take a look at the Pak-Turk relations and what can be expected from this important visit in this report by our correspondent Isa Naqvi.
Diplomatic ties between the two countries date back to 1947, soon after the creation of Pakistan. Turkey was one of the first countries to recognize Pakistan and supported its bid to become a UN member. Today, the two countries enjoy close cultural, historical and military ties, which are rapidly expanding into deepening economic relations.
Turkey is the flag bearer for Pakistan on many forums where it is a member. Pakistan and Turkey understand the threats and the larger geopolitical picture that is emerging.
Pakistan's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Aisha Faruqi says the Turkish president's delegation includes senior cabinet ministers and a large business delegation.
A central point of this visit is the HLSCC, which is the High-Level Strategic Cooperation Council meeting. In essence, this is a meeting between the two cabinets of brotherly countries. So there will be joint working group meetings, ministerial segment, and of course the final HLSCC session chaired by the Prime Minister from our side and the President of Turkey.
Despite their cordial relations, economic experts believe there is a trade deficit between Pakistan and Turkey that needs to be bridged.
We need to focus more on exporting certain things which are value-added, which are more industry-based. Pakistan can also give more opportunities to the Turkish entrepreneurs here.
President Erdogan's visit provides an opportunity to kickstart initiatives to fill the trade gap. Pakistan and Turkey have proven to be steadfast allies through the decades, despite changing regional and global scenarios. Now experts believe President Erdogan's visit will further deepen the bonds between Islamabad and Ankara. Reporting for Indus News, Isa Naqvi, Islamabad.
Protests, sit-ins and rallies have continued across India against the controversial Citizenship Act since December the 12th. 27 people have been killed in mass protests against the ruling BJP's controversial act. The demonstrators have refused to end protests until the withdrawal of the new law, largely considered anti-Muslim. Hundreds of Aligarh Muslim University students took out a candlelight march in protest against police action on Jamia Millia students. The all-women sit-ins continue in Delhi's Shaheen Bagh, Mumbai Bagh and Lucknow despite an armed attack. In India, the ruling BJP's recent massive defeat in New Delhi elections is rallying opposition parties together. Top leadership says the defeat shows India has rejected Prime Minister Narendra Modi's politics of hate. In Delhi Assembly polls, Aam Aadmi Party thumped Bharatiya Janata Party by winning 62 of 70 seats. Congress leader P. Chidambaram said people of Delhi have defeated polarizing, divisive and dangerous agenda of the BJP. West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee said leaders using faith to legitimize hate speech should take a cue from this defeat. The former Chief Minister of occupied Kashmir, Mehbooba Mufti, said Delhi has rejected vitriolic, divisive politics. The UN has revealed a list of 112 companies with business ties to illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki terms the move a victory for the international law, but Tel Aviv said the listing of the companies is a shameful capitulation to anti-Israel states. The UN's report includes notable travel companies Airbnb, Expedia, and TripAdvisor. Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet says she is conscious of the sensitivity of the issue, but adds she is satisfied with a fact-based report. Tensions in the West Bank have risen since US President Donald Trump unveiled his Middle East peace plan last month. Yesterday, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas rejected the US Middle East peace plan, calling it a gift to Israel. Speaking to the United Nations Security Council, he described the proposal as an Israeli-American plan to end the question of Palestine. Israel's former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert has extended his support to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas against the US Middle East peace plan. In a press conference in New York, Olmert said Abbas is Tel Aviv's only partner for peace.
Olmert said that an Israeli-Palestinian peace requires direct negotiations between the two sides. He described Abbas as the only representative of the Palestinian people who is willing to negotiate with Israel.
He is a man of peace. He is opposed to terror. And therefore, he is the only partner that we can deal with, and it is important for me, as someone that negotiated with President Mahmoud Abbas for a long time.
Earlier, President Abbas categorically rejected the so-called peace plan at the United Nations Security Council, saying Palestine will never accept it.
Turkey has threatened to strike Syrian government forces anywhere if any more of its troops are harmed in Syria. Speaking in Ankara, President Tayyip Erdogan said Turkey will not tolerate more violations of the truce in Syria. The remarks come after 13 Turkish soldiers were killed in recent clashes in Idlib. Moscow insists the groups fighting in northwestern Syria are terrorists. Erdogan said the Syrian regime, Russian forces and the Iran-backed militants are committing a massacre in the province. He said Ankara is determined to push Syrian forces beyond Turkish posts in the region by the end of this month.
If there is the smallest injury to our soldiers on the observation posts or other places, I am declaring from here that we will hit the regime forces everywhere from today, regardless of the lines of the Sochi Agreement or Idlib.
Earlier, President Erdogan spoke to his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin to discuss the Idlib clashes. The Kremlin said both the leaders agreed on the importance of implementing Russo-Turkish agreements on Syria. Now, in Syria, US troops have clashed government forces after one of their patrols came under attack near the city of Qamishli. American forces killed one regime loyalist during a firefight in the government-held village of Kirbat Amu, east of Qamishli. US warplanes launched one strike on the Syrian forces before the confrontation ended with the American convoy pulling out of the area. A firefight also broke out between civilians and the US forces after the incident. A war monitor said that a Russian patrol arrived on the scene to calm the situation. Meanwhile, Russia carried out airstrikes in Idlib, killing 4 civilians. The White Helmets Civil Defense Group said 3 others were wounded in the attacks. Thousands of ISIS members and their children are held in detention camps in northeastern Syria. A year after the terrorist group was crushed, these people remain abandoned by the countries they left to fight in Iraq and Syria. The question remains, where do these people go now?
Most detention camps like this are in territories controlled by Kurdish forces. The Kurds have now been pushed into a small pocket of northwestern Syria by Turkish-backed forces. Faced with new challenges, they've asked world governments to take back their ISIS member citizens. But countries remain hesitant about repatriation, fearing a public backlash against such a decision.
I joined ISIS as a fighter. After that, I left and went to Syria as a refugee. There was heavy fighting in Iraq. We can't go back there because of the unmerciful popular mobilization forces.
Unable to go home, rejoin ISIS, or face trial for their crimes, these people's lives remain stuck in limbo. Their conditions are often miserable. Sometimes as many as 50 men can be forced to live in a single cell.
We are calling on the Americans now. I want to know my sentence and my fate. If my sentence is 10 years, it's 10 years. If it's 5 years, then it's 5 years.
At least 10,000 of the ISIS prisoners held by Kurdish forces came to this region from Europe. With capitals across the EU reluctant to accept these people, they could be stuck here for years. Ironically, many of them wear orange jumpsuits, the same as ISIS captives before they were executed. ISIS sleeper cells remain a security threat worldwide.
Iran has rejected U.S. allegations that its satellite program is a cover-up for the ballistic missile testing. The U.S. has alleged technologies used to launch satellites into orbit are virtually identical to those used in longer-range missiles. Talking to media in Tehran, Defense Minister Amir Hatami said Iran's satellite launch has no military dimension and is purely a civilian matter. He said the satellite launcher is a completely non-defensive subject and it's the definite and absolute right of the Iranian nation. The minister said there is no prohibition in the world against such satellite programs. The U.S. Justice Department has charged 5 people in Texas and New York with conspiring to break oil sanctions on Iran. In a statement, the department said the suspects planned to buy oil from Iran and sell it to a Chinese refinery. The department charged the 5 persons with 1 count of conspiracy and another breaking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The government says defendants spent 8 months devising a scheme to violate the U.S. sanctions. It said if convicted, the quintet each face a maximum sentence of 25 years and a fine of up to $1.25 million. The 5 have been named as Nicholas Haven of New York and Robert Thwaites, Nicholas Fox, Zhenyu Wong, and Daniel Ray Lane from Texas. In Iraq, security forces have reopened key areas in downtown Baghdad, warning anti-government protesters to restrict demonstrations to Tahrir Square. In a statement, the Baghdad Operations Command said the security forces reopened the Al-Khalani and Wataba squares. To protect the demonstration in Tahrir Square, the forces also opened Al-Sinag Bridge and Al-Rashid Street. It warned the demonstrators not to use violent acts against the security forces or they will take legal measures. The latest move follows cooperation between the security forces and the peaceful demonstrators inside the Tahrir Square. The UN says Libyan commander Khalifa Haftar's forces have blocked flights carrying its staff to and from Libya. In a statement, the international body said the Libyan National Army has refused its regular flights permission to the land. The statement says the UN is concerned stopping flights will interrupt its humanitarian aid operations in the country. The UN envoy to Libya, Ghassan Salameh, has been mediating between Haftar and the government of national accord. The Libyan National Army has accused Salameh of being biased against it, but the UN rejects the allegations. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Welcome back. Britain has asked the UN Security Council to vote on a resolution supporting a ceasefire in Libya today. The vote will be the first binding text adopted since fighting flared in April last year. Last week, a draft resolution on Libyan ceasefire was also presented in the Council, but it was rejected by Russia. Moscow blocked the draft due to inclusion of the word mercenary in the text. Meanwhile, the Libyan parliament has called on the UN's Libya mission not to put the constitution draft up for discussion in the future talks. The parliamentarians said neither the UN nor any other body have the right to approve or reject the constitution. NATO is holding a 2-day ministerial meeting in Brussels today. The Security Alliance will discuss progress in ending the war in Afghanistan, building stability in the Middle East, and challenges posed by Russia's missile systems are also up for discussion.
Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says NATO defense ministers will discuss options for non-combat operations in the Middle East. He said despite challenging circumstances, Afghan forces are getting stronger and are helping to create conditions for peace. The Secretary General said the Taliban must commit to a reduction in violence and show that they are genuinely committed to peace before any deal. The conference agenda includes mulling an increased presence in Iraq to relieve the burden on the US-led coalition against ISIS.
We are discussing what more NATO can do, but again, before we have made any final decisions, I think it's a bit early for me to announce those decisions, but we will see what more we can do. Yeah.
NATO is also set to devise defensive measures to counter what it sees as a breach of the INF Treaty by Russia.
Moving on to North Macedonia, where the parliament has unanimously approved an agreement to make the country a NATO member. A NATO flag was later raised in front of the parliament building in Skopje during a short ceremony. President Stivo Penderecki said the final stage to North Macedonia's NATO membership has begun. Prime Minister Olivier Sposwiski also called the day historic, saying the country will become part of the world's most important security alliance. Sposky said Greece was the first NATO member to ratify the country's NATO membership. Spain is the only state yet to signal its approval. The accession protocol must be ratified by all the 29 members. US President Donald Trump has denied pressuring the US Department of Justice to seek a lighter prison sentence for his political aide Roger Stone. A new prosecutor named to the case reversed the original sentence of 7 to 9 years after a critical late-night tweet from Trump. Trump branded the 9-year sentence recommendation as ridiculous, saying the proposed sentence was a miscarriage of justice. Stone was found guilty on 7 counts of lying to Congress, obstruction, and witness tampering in November last year. Stone was the 6th person closely tied to Trump to be convicted on charges brought by former special counsel for the U.S. Department of Justice, Robert Mueller. The latest accusations come barely a week after Trump's acquittal in his impeachment trial over abuse of power and obstruction of Congress charges. Talking to reporters, the US president condemned the proposal once again while rejecting accusations of abuse of power.
I thought it was ridiculous that if that's no, I didn't speak to the justice. I'd be able to do it if I wanted. I have the absolute right to do it. I stay out of things to a degree that people wouldn't believe, but I didn't speak to him. I thought the recommendation was ridiculous. I thought the whole prosecution was ridiculous.
Staying in the U.S., where Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders has won the Democratic presidential primary in the state of New Hampshire. With over 90% of the votes counted, Sanders took almost 26% of the vote, while former Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg on just over 24%. More in this report.
As the US gears up to elect a new president later this year, the Democratic primary is becoming interesting. Bernie Sanders now appears to be leading the Democrats' left-wing liberals, while Pete Buttigieg is leading the moderate centrists. Ex-frontrunners Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren and ex-Vice President Joe Biden finished in 4th and 5th. Both Buttigieg and Sanders have asked for a partial recanvassing of last week's Iowa caucus. Sanders says the New Hampshire win is a milestone on his road to victory against President Donald Trump.
This victory here is the beginning of the end for Donald Trump. We are going to unite together and defeat the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country.
Meanwhile, Buttigieg congratulated Sanders for the victory.
I want to congratulate my competitors and their supporters on their campaigns here in New Hampshire. I admired Senator Sanders when I was a high school student. I respect him greatly to this day, and I congratulate him on his strong showing tonight.
Technology entrepreneur Andrew Yang and Colorado Senator Michael Bennet both dropped out of the race. The next stop in the Democratic Party journey to November is the Nevada caucus on February 22nd.
Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte has formally ended the two-decade-old visiting forces agreement with the United States. Foreign Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. said Manila sent the termination notice to the U.S. Embassy in Manila. Duterte's spokesperson said ending the VFA was a consequence of U.S. actions that undermine Filipino sovereignty and the judicial system. The decision was sparked by the revocation of a U.S. visa held by the former police chief who led Duterte's bloody war on drugs. U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper called the ending of the agreement unfortunate, hoping it could be reversed or delayed. Closing the agreement complicates U.S. interests in the region in the face of growing Chinese power. The VFA underlines the overall U.S.-Philippines alliance. The termination will take effect after 180 days unless both the sides agree to keep it. In Lebanon, the new government has won a vote of confidence in the parliament, while protesters trying to block the session clashed with the security forces. Hundreds of people were injured as the riot police fired tear gas at the protesters. The Lebanese Red Cross said 373 people were treated during day-long demonstrations. The parliament voted on a government policy statement saying it needed painful steps to address the financial crisis. Speaking before the vote, Prime Minister Hassan Daib described his government's task a suicide mission.
We must be honest and acknowledge that the risk of collapsing is unfortunately not imaginary. We want to save the country, but we cannot complete this suicide mission if the ones standing behind us are waiting for the moment to push us over the edge without a salvage rope.
Moving on to China, where the death toll from the new coronavirus has jumped to 1,113, with over 44,000 infected in China. The National Health Commission says 97 people have died and 2,015 others were infected in the past 24 hours. This report has the details.
While the number of new infections dwindle, deaths from the new coronavirus continue to rise. The World Health Organization has now named the virus COVID-19. The head of the WHO, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, says viruses could have more devastating consequences than any terrorist action.
We had to find a name that did not refer to a geographical location, an animal, an individual or group of people, and which is also pronounceable and related to the disease. Having a name matters to prevent the use of other names that can be inaccurate or stigmatizing.
In Japan, 39 more people have tested positive on the quarantined cruise ship, the Diamond Princess. It brings the total number of infections to 175. Tokyo's health ministry says testing is still underway and the number could rise.
Yesterday, we have found one official who had been quarantining on the cruise ship infected with the new coronavirus. This official was collected questionnaires from passengers on board.
With the virus spreading to 28 countries, several nations have evacuated their citizens from China, while others are becoming wary of trading with the country. White House National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien says the outbreak could affect the implementation of the Phase 1 trade deal.
The EU says it will host an extraordinary meeting of health ministers tomorrow to discuss the new coronavirus outbreak. The European Commissioner for Crisis Management says the conference will discuss the spread of the disease and the bloc's response. Meanwhile, a meeting of hundreds of top scientists is underway at the UN headquarters in Geneva to contain the spread of the disease. Earlier, WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said the virus outbreak is public enemy number one. In the UK, an emergency terror law has been presented to the Parliament to end the release of the convicted terrorists on parole. The law was drawn up after the Streatham attack in South London earlier this month. MPs will vote on the Terrorist Offenders Bill before the Commons go into recess tomorrow. It will then move to the Lords, with the government hoping it becomes law by February 27th. On February 2nd, an attacker stabbed two people in London days after he was set free halfway through his prison term. Justice Minister Robert Buckland says the action needs to be taken.
Yesterday's appalling incident makes the case plainly for immediate action. We cannot have the situation, as we saw tragically in yesterday's case, where an offender, a known risk to innocent members of the public, is released early by automatic process of law.
The EU says 33% of its citizens were victims of cyber attacks in 2019. In its most recent report, the EU statistical authority Eurostat says 25% of all attacks were espionage, 12% were attempts to boost website traffic. Eurostat says password harvesting using fraudulent messages and the use of fake websites to steal personal information are the most frequent. It said people in Denmark experienced the most security-related problems at 50%. They were followed by France on 46%, Sweden with 45%, and Malta and the Netherlands with 42% each. It noted the EU will continue to focus on making the internet safer and better. Last weekend's mass shooting in Thailand was the second terrorist attack in recent history to be live-streamed on Facebook. The social media giant was quick to disable the shooter's account, but the incident still kept popping up on people's feeds as terrified hostages pleaded for help online. More in this report.
Trapped with a rogue soldier who had already mowed down dozens of people, the hostages in last weekend's crisis turned to Facebook to send out pleas for help. Many of them turned to a celebrity doctor with a large online following.
People trapped inside the mall checked the news and didn't know what to do. So they sent messages to our inbox, and we are the admin of a Facebook page with a large following. At first, it was only 2 or 3 people, so we passed on the information to the Crime Suppression Division, and that's how the police found people.
Police were able to use the information sent out by the doctor to track hostages down, saving lives.
That night, I felt I couldn't sleep. Otherwise, people might die because the gunman was still walking around. If they didn't get help immediately, the person that I just talked to might not be alive any longer.
But there's also another side to the story. Authorities say the shooter not only used social media to publicize his attacks, but also used live updates from news sites to track police movement. This presents a new challenge for governments and journalists the world over in tackling terror attacks and hostage situations. 29 people were killed and 58 were wounded in the mass shooting in Thailand.
The leader of the Italy's League Party, Matteo Salvini, has asked to be put on trial for detaining migrants at sea last year. The far-right politician faces an indictment vote in the Senate. In July last year, Salvini, then Interior Minister, refused to let a group of migrants dock as he waited for other EU states to agree to take them in. The anti-immigrant populist could face up to 15 years in jail if found guilty. Conviction could also bar him from political office, dashing his ambitions to lead a future government. With the vote in the parliament almost certain to go against him, Salvini sought to make political capital out of the case.
I think I've defended my homeland. I don't ask for a prize because I received a salary for that. But if there must be a trial, so be it.
Venezuela's opposition leader Juan Guaido has been greeted with protests at the airport after returning from an international support building tour. Supporters of President Nicolas Maduro grabbed Guaido's shirt and pushed him as he came out of the building. One of the protesters also threw a liquid at Guaido. There were scuffles between protesters and the supporters of Guaido who were there to welcome him. Guaido defied a travel ban to go to Colombia, Europe, Canada and the US to gather support. He also met with US President Donald Trump. Guaido is considered the legitimate leader of Venezuela by more than 50 countries. In Nigeria, militants have killed 55 security personnel in 3 separate attacks in the northeast Borno state. Officials said in the first attack, ISIS fighters attacked a military post in a village near Maiduguri, killing a soldier and wounding another. The militants withdrew and attacked troops in nearby Ganjigana, where they killed a second soldier. In the third attack, insurgents in trucks fitted with machine guns stormed into the town of Ran near the border with Cameroon. 3 security officials were killed in the attack. ISIS issued a statement claiming the responsibility for all the 3 attacks. As locust swarms ravage crops in Horn of Africa, the UN Food and Agricultural Organization says Ethiopia, Somalia and Kenya face an unprecedented food security threat. It adds that the threat could spread to the rest of East Africa.
The FAO says it is raising funds for the crisis and sending supplies to the affected countries to boost locust control measures. The organization has helped for $76 million to help combat the locusts, but has only received $19 million so far. Locust swarms in Kenya have spread to 14 counties, kilometers from Uganda and South Sudan. Somalia was the first country in the region to declare the infestation an emergency. But security threats are stopping control operations from being launched in parts of the country. Locust breeding season has also begun, and it is predicted their population could multiply by 500 by June. The desert locust is considered the most dangerous migratory pest in the world. A swarm of 1 kilometer can eat the same amount of food as 35,000 people. 19 million people already face food insecurity across East Africa.
It's time for a short break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The death toll from Storm Ciara, which is battering Europe, has risen to 7 on its journey east. The storm has closed transport and left hundreds of thousands without power. In northern France, the storm cut power to 130,000 homes. 35,000 households in northern Austria have also been left without electricity. Over 700 flights in 4 German cities, including Frankfurt and Düsseldorf, have been cancelled. Storm Ciara, called Storm Sabine in parts of Europe, has forced schools to close across Belgium, Germany and the Netherlands. In Australia, devastating fires have been wreaking havoc in the country's bushland since last June. Rains brought some measure of relief this year, but soon turned into damaging floods. Astoundingly, many Australians remain skeptical about climate change, despite ample evidence that it is exactly what's behind the ongoing environmental disaster.
This pile of burnt rubble was once the home of Jeff McCall, a farmer from the town of Buchan, Victoria. His house was surrounded by an inferno late last year and almost reduced to ashes. 23 other homes in this town were destroyed and 1 man was killed. Despite the scale of the disaster, many locals still don't believe climate change is the reason. Jeff McCall argues that if the climate change theory is correct, snowfall should have also ceased in the country.
Like, you never hear about climate change when it's snowing, do you? We had snow in December on the mountains. So, you know, where is it? And why is it just in one little spot?
Many of Buchan's residents are cattle farmers who say they feel attacked by climate activists' criticism of the meat and dairy industry.
We're not even anything to do with the footprint. They blame our cows and everything like that. And they're all jumping on electric trains and cars and God knows what in the city. There's millions of them flying around the world in jumbo jets and that. Well, you know, it takes a good cow to put out that many emissions, I can tell you.
But scientists say over 30 years of data suggest climate change is indeed real, and it needs to be tackled. They warn Australia's current plight gives them a glimpse into the future.
It fits exactly in line with the scientific evidence, both in terms of observational studies and future climate scenarios from physical models. So not only does it fit in with that, and it's the narrative that climate science has been given through the data for the last 30 or 40 years, it's a glimpse of the future.
As of January 2020, Australian bushfires have burnt an estimated 17 million hectares. This is an area equivalent to almost 24,000 football fields. Left unchecked, the country could see even more damage in the coming years.
8 people have died in Bolivia as heavy rain sparked floods and mudslides. Civil defense authorities say 50 homes were destroyed by the landslips. Officials say torrential rains flooded rivers in areas including La Paz, Santa Cruz and Potosi. The seasonal downpour has affected 250 families. In the disaster's aftermath, residents are scouring their broken homes for belongings. The annual rainy season in Bolivia begins in November and runs until March.
Water was coming into my house. I could only see the walls of my house on the floor. There was no way to get out. I did whatever I could to get out. We met up with a neighbor and we helped to defend our houses. For nearly 30 minutes, we were fighting against the water.
Harvey Weinstein's defense team has rested its case in his rape trial, with the fallen Hollywood power broker choosing not to testify. Weinstein is charged with rape, a criminal sexual act, and predatory sexual assault, among 5 charges, and faces a life imprisonment if convicted. Since January 22nd, 6 women have accused Weinstein of sexual assault. The former film producer denies the allegations. Weinstein's attorneys argue the sexual relationships were consensual and transactional because the women were willingly involved to boost their careers. Closing arguments are expected later this week, followed by a complex jury deliberation by the 7 men and 5 women.
Ms. Rotuno will address everything in her closing argument. She will splice it all together to just show that these witnesses did not help the prosecutor meet the highest burden in the land of beyond a reasonable doubt and strip Harvey Weinstein of his constitutional rights to the presumption of innocence.
In the Kenyan capital Nairobi, a sculptor has begun a campaign to raise awareness on the importance of recycling. For his part, he reworks metal scrap into art with a message. More in this report.
2 life-size lions crafted from scrap metal guard the entrance to studio of sculptor Kioko Mwitiki. Nearby sits a leopard beside a giant elephant sculpture. Over 30 years, Mwitiki has reworked thousands of tons of discarded metal collected from supermarkets and factories into wildlife artifacts. He says he does it to combat pollution, overconsumption, and climate change.
Recycling now has become a very important issue because, you just need to be really in sync with what is happening. All this plastic in the air, all this plastic in the ocean, and also the whole idea of Africa being in a very unique place. We are on the receiving end of a lot of pollution in the world.
Mwitiki has built lion sculptures with animal snares used by illegal hunters and poachers in national parks. He believes the choice of materials helps to draw attention to wildlife conservation.
I grew up in an area where the migration was coming through, the wildebeest migration, in a place called Kajiado. That part of the migration does not exist anymore because if you study migration patterns, there was a pattern that used to go up north from Tanzania to Namanga through Kajiado back into the Mara.
To grow his campaign, Mwitiki trains young artists who want to get involved in similar recycling schemes.
Lows in the highs of the business world now. The OPEC has lowered its forecast for growth in global oil demand this year by nearly a fifth. It cited China's coronavirus outbreak as the major factor behind its decision. In its monthly report, OPEC said it now expects growth in global oil demand of 0.99 million barrels per day this year. That's down by 1.22 million barrels per day from the previous month's estimate. The amended forecast is likely to reinforce the case for OPEC and allied non-OPEC producers to impose additional output cuts sooner rather than later. International benchmark Brent crude traded at $55.06, up nearly 2%. China remains in crisis mode weeks after the epidemic exploded, with much of the country shut down. The European Union has decided to impose trade sanctions on Cambodia over alleged human rights violations. On the other hand, the bloc approved free trade and investment deals with Vietnam. In a statement, an EU official said the bloc asked the Cambodian authorities to end human rights violations. The move will automatically introduce EU tariffs on sugar, travel goods, footwear, and selected garments from Cambodia. The duties will hit 1 billion euros worth annual exports of Cambodia to the EU. Vietnam mainly exports telecommunications equipment, food and clothing to Europe. Meanwhile, the EU hopes that the exports from Vietnam will touch nearly $17 billion by 2035.
This is not about inflicting pain. This is about finding a balanced way to address a very serious issue regarding violations of human and labor rights, while at the same time also taking into account the development needs of Cambodia.
The US stock markets have risen as investors tried to shake off concerns over the coronavirus fears. Investors showed resilience by pushing stocks back to all-time highs. The Dow Jones Industrial Average Index is trading nearly 1% higher. The indices of S&P 500 and Nasdaq Composite are also trading over 0.5% higher. Corporate earnings remained in focus after CVS Health, Shopify and others reported better than expected results. European markets are trading higher after China recorded its lowest number of new coronavirus cases since January. Investors are buying back underpriced stocks as major shares track the global rally. Frankfurt's DAX is trading 0.75% higher. London's FTSE 100 and the CAC 40 in Paris each gained ground on a surge in oil shares. In Asia, the Shanghai Composite and Hang Seng led the gains, closing nearly 1% higher. The Nikkei 225 also gained 0.75% as shares of the index heavyweight SoftBank Group leapt 12%. Meanwhile, prices of international Brent crude jumped nearly 2.5% as slowdown in COVID-19 cases eased fuel demand concerns. US tech giant Google says EU's policy of imposing hefty fines over antitrust concerns threatens internet innovation. The company is charged with abusing its dominance as a search engine to give an unfair advantage to its own shopping comparison service. Google starts the first of 3 legal challenges against a total of $9 billion in EU fines. The fine is 4 times higher than its rival Microsoft's fines of 2.2 billion euros imposed by the EU. Both the company's regulatory troubles in Europe have lasted a decade. Google is likely to launch a 3-pronged attack against the Commission's 2017 decision. The court ruling is likely to come next year. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.